a young defenseman on a Western Conference team is potentially available for trade, and Pat and I are going to discuss that right after this.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. You can follow him on all social media platforms at Syndrome for Wet. You can also follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. And you can follow the show's Instagram at LockedOn_Penguins. Of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen / watch of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. Pat, Elliot Friedman released his 32 Thoughts blog late last night, and one of the thoughts that he had centered around Anaheim Ducks defenseman Pavel Mintyukov, who has been healthy scratched for the last couple of games. He's behind Jackson Lacombe, Olin Zellweger, both young defensemen who are already fairly good. Ian Moore has been elevated in Mintyukov's place. Remember, people, this is the 10th overall pick in the 2022 NHL draft. And it sounds like Mintyukov does want a change of scenery. And at first glance, this does make a lot of sense for the Penguins. This is someone who is only 21 years old. He played 63 games during the 23-24 season, 4 goals, 28 points in those 63 games. Last season played in 68 games. His production went down a little bit, but he still had 5 goals and 19 points. This year, he's played in 18 games, but again, he's had the back-to-back scratches, 3 points, all assists in 18 games. This is someone that can play on the left side, which is an area of need still for the Penguins, very much a big need. He is only 21 years old, so this very much fits the profile of player that Kyle Dubas would love to go after. It makes sense. However, Pat, I don't know if the Penguins have the package to get this done. Personally, I'm not sure the Ducks are going to want to do futures here because look at the start they're off to. They are very much in the playoff race. I think they'd want to do a player-for-player swap, but I'm not sure the Penguins want to move some of their young pieces to get this player. For example, I've seen people throw out Owen Pickering, and while it could make a little bit of sense on the surface, why would the Ducks make that trade? Because they're trying to undo their logjam on the left side, not just add another left-handed defenseman to that side. They would probably want back and forward. And speaking of that, I've seen people say Ville Koivunen. Don't think the Penguins want to do that. I'm not trading Rutger McGroarty for him either. No other really big top forward prospect. I'd be willing to do someone lesser than that. But again, it's kind of on the Penguins terms where it's like, take our lesser prospect for someone who we think could be an everyday player. So I'm just not sure the Penguins have the right match, even though on paper, it makes so much sense from an acquisition standpoint.
The only 2 prospects that I could see fitting the bill for Anaheim in this trade are 2 of the other 3 first-round picks from this year in Horcoff and Zonin. And I don't think Kyle Dubas and the Penguins want to part with them, especially not Horcoff right now because he leads the NCAA in goals. And he went from someone that we looked at as, okay, he's going to be a bit of a project. It's going to take a while to, he might be 2 years away from being an NHL player, or at the very least getting a cup of coffee at the NHL level. So I don't see them wanting to part with either of those prospects. And I don't think that they should, because you look at where the Ducks are right now, you look at where the Penguins are right now, and Zonin and Horcoff fit right into this team's timeline for where they want to go. And both of them, even Zonin with all of the injury problems, still has a ton of promise. I already talked about Horcoff and how good he has been to start the college hockey season. You brought up Pickering, and like you said, that would just further their logjam. He might have more of an opportunity to get into Anaheim's lineup, but it wouldn't solve their problems. So I think on the surface, this could make sense. But the biggest hurdle that I see right now is while the Ducks aren't in win now mode, they are very much playing with house money right now with how good of a start they've been off to. they are in win soon mode. In the next year or two, they're going to want to be a solid playoff team and hopefully take that next step into becoming a real contender in the Western Conference. And when you look at what the Penguins have, and this is going to sound silly to say, the only player I can really see them having any interest in is Rickard Rakell, who used to play for them. And he's hurt right now. And I also don't think that what they would get in Pavel Mintyukov is exactly what they would want to get for Rickard Rakell. So it's tough. The fit is definitely there for the Penguins. The problem is I don't really see a package that ends up working to make this happen.
And I'm not moving a first round pick or anything like that. The Penguins are in no position to move a first. I also don't know if they would move a second to try and get him either. I think from the
I
Penguins
will
perspective- go ahead.
say I'm with you in the sense that I wouldn't move a first
No.
for him, but I wouldn't be against either a conditional second in the next 2 or 3 years that maybe becomes a first if, say, he hits a certain production level or the Penguins go a certain length. Because if either or of those things happen in a trade like that, it means you got what you gave up, essentially. If he pushes your team closer to playoff contention or even actual contention, or he hits a certain benchmark of production at the NHL level, then you essentially got a first rounder in that regard. But that is, again, so far, I think not so far, but far away from what I think Anaheim is looking for, that I still don't think that's enough to get it done.
Probably not. And I'll push back a little bit. I probably still wouldn't do a second just considering where they're at. I think the Penguins would probably prefer to trade, one of the veteran pieces that they have. But again, I don't think the Ducks may go for that either. I think they may try to do a young player for a young player swap. Pat Verbeek can be really patient with this. It's only back-to-back healthy scratches. He can really take his time. He's not going to be in a rush, so he can maybe wait for the right package to come along. Again, I think for the Penguins, the fit is very much there. If he hits, he can be someone that can be a mainstay on the left side for years to come, and he's had the production already in the NHL, but just not sure they have the pieces that Anaheim. Well, I'll say this. I think the Penguins have some good young pieces. They just don't want to trade them in this deal, and rightfully so. Like, I've seen people throw out Brunick, for example. I don't think the Penguins are obviously going to do that. They very much have a plan for him. I think the Penguins would want to do this deal on their terms, where they give up a veteran, something like that. But I still don't think that's good enough to get it done. I think the Ducks would want a younger player coming back, and I'm not sure with where the Penguins are at. They want to do that, and hey, I get it.
I also think if you really break this down, you said Verbeek is patient, and I agree with that. I don't think that he's going to panic and decide, oh my God, Mintyukov wants out. We got to get rid of him. We got to move him now. You have control of a young player, and this is an emotional moment. You're a young player who they think is going to be a big piece of the team. You struggle a little bit. They pull you out of the lineup, and it stings. It's not a good place to be for a young player. But in 2 weeks, he could get back into the lineup, perform well, or at the very least, he could have a conversation with the coaching staff and management where they say, listen, we're not down on you. We're not saying that you're a bust now, and he might figure it out. And then on the other side of that, the season can continue. The Ducks can continue to be right there in the mix in the Pacific Division. And maybe Verbeek decides, maybe I need a little extra piece here to push me into playoff contention, and you still have him, and they can say, all right, now is the time to strike. And maybe by then the Penguins aren't doing as well, or the Penguins aren't really all that worried about, do we make the playoffs? Do we not? And if they come calling and they say, hey, we want, say, Rickard Rakell or Anthony Mantha or something like that, that gives them a little bit of extra juice heading into March and April, you can make that deal then. I think if you're Kyle Dubas at this point, you call Verbeek and just say, hey, I'm interested in this. I don't think you're going to move him now. I don't think you have to move him now, but if you're going to revisit it, you've got my number. Let's talk.
Yeah, that's fair. And hey, maybe the Ducks could potentially want a veteran back. Again, I personally think they would want one of their young player back for someone like Mintyukov, but that's also just my opinion. So maybe that changes. It's something at least worth keeping an eye on throughout the season, because I do think he could really help the Penguins. And if he really hits, he could be someone that could be on that left side for years to come. That's the talent level and the skill set is very much there for this player to be a dude in the NHL. But I think that'll do it for this first segment. Coming up in the second segment, I was at Penguins practice again today, and they were working on a lot of past regulation things on Thursday, including 3-on-3 overtime and a shootout. I'm going to discuss what I saw today coming up right after this. But before we get to that, we have to tell you all about our first sponsor, and that is Rugiet. Let's be real, making excuses doesn't solve anything. We've all heard them before. It's just stress. I'm tired, or it happens to everyone sometimes. But when it comes to performance, sometimes your body just needs a little extra support, and that's where Rugiet comes in. Rugiet.com offers fast-acting, doctor-prescribed treatments for ED designed to help you stop making excuses and start making moves. Rugiet makes it easy to get started. You just connect with a board-certified doctor 100% online, no awkward waiting rooms or no in-person appointments. It prescribes your treatment ships discreetly straight to your door. The process is fast, simple, and private, and it's all handled by real doctors. It's about confidence, connection, and getting back to the moments that matter. Visit Rugiet.com/LockedOnNHL to get 15% off your first order. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNHL. And don't forget to use our code LockedOnNHL so they know we sent you. That's Rugiet. Stop making excuses and start making moves. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-hosts, Pat Dam and Pat. Penguins had another long practice today. They've been really working out the details over these last few days, going into their next game, finally, God willing, on Friday. It's been another very long break, but hey, I guess it's been good that we've been able to recharge, because December is going to be hell on earth with the schedule that this team has, and we're going to be busy previewing and recapping games and all this other stuff. So I guess in a way, it's nice having a break, but also I'm just ready to watch more Penguins hockey at this point. I think everyone listening to the show is ready for that too. But today, another long practice, a lot of 5-on-5 work, some more 6-on-5 work. But at the end of practice, Damu's decided to work on some 3-on-3 drills and some shootouts. So it was almost like a mini 3-on-3 scrimmage. So the two teams were separated on their separate benches, and they were really practicing overtime, because Damu's has seen that they have struggled a little bit. I mean, they've only lost one game, at least in the 3-on-3 session. They've lost 3 others in shootouts, and I'll get to that in a second. But you can really see that Muse is trying to work out some of the kinks with 3-on-3. I saw them be, a lot quicker in overtime. This was also just a practice, so we have to see if that translates over to game action. But they were quicker. They were more decisive with their decisions. It was fun to watch. And then after that, Pat, they did something that I want them to do once a week during practice, and that's end a practice with a shootout. Team Murashov won it. Evgeny Malkin had the funniest celebration on the bench after a goal, just banging his stick along the boards and just screaming so loud. It was really funny. But I like that Damu's has been able to see that, the shootout has been a pretty big weakness. I think everyone knows that. This goes back not just this year, but the last few years. He has seen that it is a weakness, and he's having his team practice it at least, so these last couple of weeks, once a week. And I want that to continue, especially because they've bled a few points in the shootout so far.
There aren't many things from the Dan Bilesma era that I want to come back, but I wouldn't be against Mustache Boy making a return to the Penguins organization, because as you said, as everyone knows, they are dreadful in the shootout. And while it's not that big of a deal in the regular season, it's still a thing that you have to be able to do. And as we have seen, they are unable to do it. I also really like the comments of Brian Rust after practice, where he was asked about working on this stuff. And he kind of had the same mentality as Dan Muse in the sense that he said, hey, we're in a time of the schedule where we have the ability to work on this. We're not preparing for 3 games and 4 nights or anything. We've got a little bit of extra time where we can focus on other things. We don't have to be just getting ready for games and preparing for certain opponents. So it's smart by the coaching staff to try this out. And I do think that at the end of the day, this team should still be really good in 3-on-3 overtime. There aren't a lot of excuses for them not to be. You look at the top of their lineup specifically, there's really no reason for them not to be great at 3-on-3 when you've got Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Brian Rust, Ricard Raquel when he's healthy, now Ben Kindle, Erik Karlsson, Chris Letang. This should be a team that when you take the 2 extra skaters off the ice for overtime, they should be dominant, and they just aren't.
Yeah, I hear you. I think it's kind of been, what's the word I'm looking for?
I mean, I would go with disappointing.
Yeah.
All the reasons I just laid out. You look at all the talent that they have at the top of the lineup, and we can make our critiques of what they do during the full 60, and they're very real and very obvious. But when you get into the pond hockey part of the game, they should be able to dominate that. And like I said, they just haven't been.
Right. I think they've just been a little lethargic in OT, which, see what you want about at the end of Sully's tenure. They did play pretty well in 3-on-3 overtime last year. It looked like that him and his staff were improving in that area, just because for a time it was not good and they were bleeding points, especially in 3-on-3 overtime. It got a little bit better towards his final season. So far this year, Muse and his staff are working out some of the kinks, and I'm glad that they were practicing that today. Even in the shootout, I saw a player like Chris Letang. Usually his patented move is, forehand, backhand. Hell, he went backhand, forehand today. So he added another move to his repertoire. So I like seeing that. Ben Kindle had a little bit of a nice move. Didn't score, but it was still a nice move. I thought Artur Shilov's was, a little bit better. I was watching him more intently just because we all know his struggles in shootouts so far. And hey, he definitely looked better. It's practice. Let's say that. But it was at least a little bit better. So I wanted to see them keep doing that once a week, because they've already played 3 shootouts this year. They're probably going to play at least a few more, and you don't want to just be bleeding points for the sake of it because you're just so bad at it. Yeah, we can hate shootouts all we want, and yeah, they suck. I hate them so much. Pat doesn't like them either. You'd be hard-pressed, I think, to find a lot of NHL fans that like them, but if they're still part of the game, you got to practice them at least sometimes. And I'm glad that Muse is doing that over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah. And the thing is, you need the reps. That's just the end all be all of it. Is part of the reason that they were so good at them in the early part of the Crosby Malkin era was that they practiced them at least once a week, if not more. And whether you want to admit it or not, that was part of the reason that they were so good at them, because they just continued to get the reps in practice.
That and Marc-Andre Fleury being an absolute sicko on breakaways always.
And that's exactly what I was about to say. For better or for worse, he was facing breakaways in practice once or more a week. And just getting those reps in helps you get better at them. Same thing goes for the shooters, especially when you play against a goalie as good in shootouts as Marc-Andre Fleury. You have to find ways to beat them. And then when you go play goalies and teams that don't practice it as much, you catch them off guard and you're able to beat them. The opposite has begun to become a thing in Pittsburgh with how little they have been practicing them. The other part of this that I really think is going to be big is that it kind of builds on what has been a really positive part of this season, is that you see the confidence building. You see this team starting to believe in themselves. And yeah, we're not expecting them to go full Sidney Crosby, stone face, competitive all the time, 24/7. You have a little bit of fun at the end of practice with a shootout. You can talk some crap to your teammates. You can try some things out. Guys will be going back and forth. And that just helps with team camaraderie. You'll see a guy who you don't expect to go in and score a goal, and it hypes everybody up. So I think even just away from needing to get better at it, it's just another way to bond as a team. Have a little shootout competition at the end of practice, healthy competition, fun competition. And it helps you in an area of the game where you've been pretty poor as of recent years.
Right. And now hopefully they won't be too caught off guard when they have another shootout at some point this season, or 2 or 3, or if they have more than that potentially. So I agree with you on that. And hell, the losing team had to do push-ups on the ice before they all stretch. So it was fun. You saw Evgeny Malkin getting pretty hyped up on the bench. Even Erik Karlsson was getting hyped up as well. They were having fun, but I can also tell that everyone is excited to get back into game action just because they've been off for a while. My dogs went crazy when they're hearing that because they're also ready for games as well. But that's going to do it for this second segment. Coming up to end the show, Ryan Graves had some spicy comments to Jason Mackey today of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Pat and I are going to break some of those comments down right after this. But before we get to that, we have to tell you all about our final sponsor, which is FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there is no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And even outside the NBA, you can bet on the Steelers this weekend playing against the Chicago Bears. Aaron Rodgers, he has owned the Bears throughout his career. He's trying to get back into game shape for this weekend, dealing with a little bit of a fractured wrist. Was limited in practice today. You can place a bet on him. Any Steelers player going up against the Bears in the Windy City. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-hosts, Pat Stamp and Pat. Ryan Graves, the Penguins defenseman, had a little bit to say to Jason Mackey of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette today. He got these quotes, put them on Twitter. And as we know, Ryan Graves, if we call a spade, and Pat and I are always objective on this show, Graves has been better since coming up from Wilkes-Barre. Did not have a good couple of seasons. The bar was literally on the floor, did not even make the team out of camp. But since coming up from Wilkes-Barre after starting the season with the Baby Penguins, he has actually been fine. He hasn't been a train wreck in his own zone. One of his keeps in the offensive zone actually led to a goal for the Penguins. Sometimes, or a lot of times I should say, I'm not really noticing him, which is also a good thing. So he's starting to at least play a little bit better. And what Graves said to Mackey was this: the last few years, I have really tried to fit a mold. Now the staff has said, be you, be what you have been your whole career. The last quote, though, this is the one that's eye-opening. That's freeing to be able to play your style of game. That is now the second Penguins defenseman to say this over the last week or two. The first one was Erik Karlsson. Now Ryan Graves is saying this. Pat, I don't want to read a lot into it, but it still seems like to me that's yet another shot at the former Penguins head coach. And hey, I don't blame them, considering that Graves was especially really bad his first couple of years. I mean, what we're seeing this year from Karlsson is even better than what we saw his first couple of seasons. And, will Ryan Graves keep this up? I don't know. I still got to see a lot more here. I'm glad that he is playing better. I want him to play better, but he still has a long way to go after what we saw for the first couple of years. But again, Pat, that's the second defenseman to make a very eye-opening quote about the former head coach of this team.
For those who may not remember, here was the Erik Karlsson quote. We have good individual players, and now we're finally starting to feel good as a team. The roles are starting to slot in. You know what is expected of you. You do the things you're good at and not the things that someone tells you to do that you can't do. Here's how I'm going to interpret this, because our listeners know, Hunter, I'm a big Mike Sullivan guy. I always have been, but that doesn't mean that I think he's perfect or above criticism or can't be critiqued. I know his shortcomings. And I think now we're really starting to see what happened near the end. And I blame some of it on management. I also blame a good bit of it on Mike Sullivan himself. I think Mike Sullivan was very married to the way he wanted the team to play.
Yeah.
He wanted them to play a high pressure, fast paced system. And the Penguins just didn't have the personnel to run that anymore. Half because the team got older. The team made some head scratching moves that didn't really fit into the type of mold of player that Mike Sullivan needed to play his system. But I also look at it as Mike Sullivan needed to adapt. Mike Sullivan needed to admit that the team he had at his disposal was no longer the type of team that could play the system he preferred. And does this mean that he's at fault for Erik Karlsson's first 2 seasons being kind of disappointing? I don't think so. I think the kind of system that Mike Sullivan likes to run actually should have benefited Erik Karlsson, and for whatever reason it didn't. Same goes for Ryan Graves, but just not in the same way. Ryan Graves just had not played well.
No.
Ryan Graves was just a disaster. He was not good defensively, and a lot of his game is predicated upon being a at least dependable two-way defenseman. And most of his defensive play, if not all of it, his first 2 years of Penguin, was disastrous. So if you can't get that together, everything else is going to fall apart. But to bring it all full circle, I think we are starting to learn that the final couple of years of Mike Sullivan was one of very heavy stubbornness.
That, and it was time for a change even, before the end of the season, when they made the change overall. I think it's been pretty evident when you read some of these comments, when you see the fast start that they're off to, how refreshing Dan Muse hockey is. The change probably should have happened a bit sooner than it did. Obviously, we all know what Sully did. We don't need to rehash all that at the end of this show because we've done it so many other times. But again, it's evident that this was a change that needed to happen sooner than it did. But again, pretty eye-opening comments. I don't think Graves will be the last to say something like this. That's now, again, 2 defensemen that have said this in the last couple of weeks. And we can only hope that the good vibes continue to keep going. Penguins have 2 more games this weekend before Buffalo next week. And then, you have December coming up and it's going to be pretty busy. Ryan Graves is going to be someone that I'm going to keep watching pretty intently since coming up. He's been fine. And I've said it on social media. I've said it on this show that he has been better. And I hope it continues. I really do. But we have to see, the bar is still really low considering what he did for the first couple of years. But if he can keep improving, that's only going to get better, especially, Pat, maybe if he keeps improving, and this is a big maybe, they can get something for him way down the line. But that's very much wishful thinking right now. We're still
if nothing else, he plays up to his deal. I know that's putting the cart so far ahead of the horse.
Let's chill out.
But you're also doing the same thing. You're saying that maybe they can get something for him in a trade, but that means he's going to have to at least get close to or play up to his deal. If he can figure that out down the road, we're in good position. But at the end of the day, I'll finish with this for this segment. This is going to be the challenge for Dan Muse moving forward. And it's not solving all of these problems because he's a head coach in the NHL. He's not a miracle worker. But he can't fall into the same trap of, I had success doing this, so I'm going to continue to do this one thing. You have to be adaptable. You have to be willing to make adjustments. And I will add this just to make sure that I don't get these comments. Mike Sullivan adjusted plenty. He made a lot of changes throughout his entire tenure as the Penguins head coach. The problem was a lot of the basics stayed the same, and those basics weren't working anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you saw that at the end of his tenure with the way they were defending in the third period, the way they were giving up too many odd man rushes, the way his system just felt, stagnated, especially with how much faster the league had gotten and all that stuff. But again, we have already discussed that a lot, but just want to discuss that quote from Ryan Graves because, again, that's another player that has said something. So we'll see if any other players say something like that. I imagine at least one other player will, just considering the way this season has going and the quotes that keep coming out from the Penguins locker room. But that'll do it for this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to / watch this one. Pat and I will be back with a fresh episode for you all on Friday, previewing both games against the Wild and the Kraken. And of course, Fan Take Friday returns. We want to hear from you, give your takes, ask your questions, all that good stuff. You can put it down in the comments and all that jazz. So for Patrick Damp, I am Hunter Hodes. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We appreciate it. We'll be back on Friday.